Hey, I'm Tim Seeley. I'm the current writer of Bloodshot for Valiant Comics, which comes out this September. And I'm going to be drawing a picture of Bloodshot. We're going to talk about some comic stuff while I do it. Usually I'd be doing this with a blue pencil, but it doesn't show up very good because it's by design kind of invisible. So I'm going to do it with a regular lead pencil. I borrowed all these art supplies from my friend Aaron Campbell. So he's a really talented artist, so these are blessed. So if it doesn't turn out well, it's because of Aaron's art supplies, not because of me. So basically I'm just kind of laying stuff out first, get some reference next to me. Not that there's a lot that you need to know about Bloodshot other than that he's a hard-looking dude with a big red spot on his chest, but I want to make sure I get it right. Our approach to it was, let's make this as accessible as possible so that even if you don't know a lot about Bloodshot or if you just saw a ripping Vin Diesel movie, you can just come into this and grab this and totally know what's going on. It's basically just sort of picking up with Bloodshot being this guy who we just know he's a Frankenstein kind of character. He's been built into this weapon. He never chose this. This wasn't what he wanted. He just woke up one day full of tiny little machines and had a bad attitude and had to shoot people. He's not super happy about it, so he's trying to sort of take back his own life. I mean, it's kind of a monster story, but the basic thing that we kind of do in this is try to make it about a guy who is sick of other people determining his fate kind of thing. So, which is a great action movie type setup because then you can just have him fighting lots of dudes who are trying to use him. So we started off with him. He's kind of setting up his own missions across the world, kind of doing whatever he wants, but he's obviously limited because he's by himself. And some people have been sent to hunt him down that are this sort of super clandestine organization called, they don't even have a name, they're just called Black Bar after the way their name appears on all official documents. So first 3 issues are just one big, huge action scene, but with lots of, character development and pathos and emotional stuff. But mostly it's bullets and fighting dudes. I'm the perfect age for 90s comics. I was 13 in 1990, so 1990 was like the debut of Rob Liefeld's X-Force and Jim Lee X-Men, and then right after that, or Death of Superman. So it was like this time in comics when like everything in comics was extreme and huge and big, and Valiant debuted. That was when I had lawn mowing money, and every week I would bike, like 6 miles to go get my new comics. I was so in. I originally really I wanted to draw comics. I guess I didn't know there was a difference between writing and drawing. I guess I kind of thought of them the same thing. So I never thought of myself as a writer, but I was always drawing stuff. I think what always works about the characters, it has that sort of aggressive, hard-ass 80s action movie by way of Frankenstein horror movie. So he's a perfect design, really. Red eyes, big red spot, white skin. He's like G.I. Crow. The Crow plus G.I. Joe. It's G.I. Crow. That's. So the issue that comes out for Free Comic Book Day is kind of a perfect primer for people who want to check out the character, and I think it acts as a sort of an entry point for any level of familiarity. So it's a big, cool, character-based action scene. So that one is, by design, like the most easily accessible. We're going to tell you what this dude is and what he does, and then he just fights a bunch of bad dudes, and it's big, epic action with this artist, Tomas Giorello. And I just went crazy with it. It's sort of like, it's like Mad Max in the snow, kind of mixed with Sin City, I guess, is kind of what we were going for. And it's a good warm-up. It's like just trying to get the sort of voice of the book. I feel like sometimes comics are a little bit ashamed to be sort of big testosterone fight scenes. I think if you do that sort of thing and you add a lot of character and personality, and we know about these people that there's nothing wrong with a big fight scene with tons of bullets and crashing vehicles, and we should never be ashamed to do that in comics because we can do that so well. So the artist on the book is Brett Booth, and speaking of being a kid from the 90s, Brett is just a little older than me and started out in comics in that sort of Image Comics revolution. So when he debuted, I think I was like 16 or 17. He was doing a book called Backlash at Wildstorm at Image Comics before it became DC. If you'd told me then I would be writing an action comic for Brett Booth, I would definitely peed my pants, for sure. There's no doubt about it. Because I thought his stuff was so cool. When they told me that he was drawing this book, my enthusiasm went up pretty high because I can now write towards, I know what he does. He does big, cool action stuff, and I can just write him that stuff. He's doing a really cool job with it. All right, now I'm inking, but I'm inking with a big old fat marker. I like a good brush pen. I don't have the steadiness for like a real brush, plus I hate tipping, but I can do with a brush pen, I can do all this sort of stuff and get away with it and have it look pretty good. I always like that this version of Bloodshot has the high hairline. It's a character I can relate to. One of the big secrets of comics is that you don't have time for reference a lot of times, so you have to know how to draw a lot of stuff just out of your head. But when you can, like there's some stuff you will just never be able to pull out of your head, and that's modern cars, because they're curves and you can never ever just make that up. And horses, no one can draw a horse just out of their head, really. Things are like counterintuitive, but like with characters and people, you're gonna wanna be able to do as much of this just by muscle memory as you can, because every moment you spend digging up reference is a moment you're not drawing. My pitch was, I think it was 12 issues, I believe. So we definitely have, that first year pretty well figured out. I always leave a little bit of room for like improvisation and inspiration because that's one of the best things about comics is that you can kind of make stuff up as you go along. You want to be able to react to what the reader likes, If you introduce a character and it just happens to go over really well, you want to be able to refocus. Basically, you want to have like a 3-act structure in a 3-act structure. So you want every issue to be a 3-act structure in that there's a sort of introduction of a problem and a rising action and a climax. In comics, though, you also want that sort of last action to end on a cliffhanger to keep people coming back. So you kind of have to build in arcs within arcs is kind of the job. The way that Brett drew the first action scene I'm really happy with. There's a tank chase scene in the first issue, and I wrote it, I was like, oh man, I don't know if an artist will be able to pull this off. I feel really bad the way I wrote this. But then seeing the way Brett did it, I'm happy with how it turned out. I'm excited for people to see it. But the idea was like every issue in the first 3, I want to have like a completely different action scene scenario. So the first one is giant tank fight scene, and the second one is a kind of like a jetpack chase scene, and then the third one, I just wrote that one and I can't remember what we did. But basically every single one was going to just be an innovative way to, like, we have to Fast and Furious this thing up, is basically what I had to figure out how to do. It's kind of figuring out the stakes on him can be tough because he's such a badass. He heals from all his wounds, so you have to make sure that the stakes are there, that he is in danger, and that there's reason for him not to fail. So at first that can be kind of tough because it's really hard to put him in physical danger, so you have to put him in moral danger. His conflict is that if he lets himself be used because he's so dangerous, that he will end up hurting other people. And it's also, he can't really have other people around him because though he can take a bunch of bullets, not everyone else can. So he has to sort of really be careful who he lets get near him. That has to be his conflict. His disconnect from humanity because he needs them to not be in danger is kind of his big conflict. And that's one thing with Brett doing this book too, is Brett draws real pretty dudes. I'm not quite as good at drawing pretty dudes as he is, but he actually makes Bloodshot kind of a sexy guy. He's got lots of abs for miles when Brett draws them. I can make pretty ladies, but I'm not as good at handsome dudes. I'm working on it. I'm studying lots of handsome dudes is what I'm, trying to get this right. It depends on the character, but you can do a sort of tighter inking. Like if I was doing, with tech pens and stuff, I could do a lot sort of tighter hatching lines and stuff. But because I have a brush, I'm kind of by design making it a little looser and kind of letting the texture of a brush pen and a big fat marker and the paper kind of do a little bit of the work for me. And I just did a flashback in issue 3 that kind of ties to another Valiant book. So kind of the cool thing about the Valiant stuff is it's not quite as in-depth as histories of like Marvel and DC, which is a lot deeper and longer. So I mean, one editor can pretty much cover you on most of this stuff. And I know my Valiant pretty good too. So I was reading, I think, Bloodshot and Archer and Armstrong and Quantum and Woody before I got the gig, so I knew my stuff. So drawing flat like this I'm familiar with it because when I was a kid, my mom would bring home from her office job reams of office paper, and it had like the holes on the side so you could put it on a track, And so we would all sit on the kitchen table and we would draw these like, I had 2 brothers, and we would just draw like, I would draw one side of a fight scene and they would draw the others, and it would be like this storytelling sort of thing that would go on. It was always like some group of superheroes or robots or He-Man guys fighting another group of guys. That's where my storytelling sense comes from, clearly. For Bloodshot, he's full of these tiny little robots, and they kind of come out of his skin at that spot, so that's kind of like when he puts a shirt on, it bleeds through, which is goth as hell. That's super goth. I think like a lot of artists appreciate it because I know not to pack a page with too much stuff that can't be done in one spot, but I also know like that after if I write them like, a bunch of 6 and 7 panel pages, that I know I need to give them like a 2-panel page or a 1-panel or a splash just to save them and give them something fun to do. I actually think more comic book writers should be artists, or they should at least draw something. I think that's kind of what happens a lot of times when you have people who aren't comic book artists come in and write comics. It's really hard for them to understand the medium of comics. You can only have like, a character can only do one action at a time in a scene. You can't have them like take off their hat and comb their hair at the same time necessarily. You have to have one action at a time. It's learning a language, really. Because really the script is just written for the artist. No one else sees it. So it's just kind of a weird, intimate communication between 2 people. We'll make it drippy because that's cool. And this marker's so nice, it dries it over stuff. So I can sign with a red marker in there. There you go, we got some Bloodshot action. I'm Tim Seeley, writer of Bloodshot, and I drew Bloodshot for you today.